The picture frame sat on my nightstand for almost 8 months before a stranger told me to throw it away. Not a doctor, not a detective. A retired electrician named Gerald who lived 2 doors down and fixed things for people in the neighborhood because he had nothing else to do with his afternoons. He probably saved my life, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where this really started, because the beginning matters. The beginning is the part I keep replaying at 2 in the morning when I can't sleep, which is most mornings now. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher in Asheville, North Carolina. I coached junior varsity baseball for 11 of those years. I drove a used Ford pickup for a decade because I didn't see the point in buying new. My wife Carol passed away from a stroke in the spring of 2022, and after the funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming and the neighbors stopped checking in, I was left alone in a house that still smelled like her shampoo. That's the version of me my older son Derek came home to that following Christmas. He hadn't visited since the funeral. Said work was difficult to get away from. He worked in commercial real estate in Charlotte. Always had something closing. Always had a client who needed him urgently. I understood. Or I told myself I understood. Which is what fathers do. My daughter Rachel, who teaches elementary school 20 minutes away and calls me every Sunday without fail, had been the one holding things together. She brought groceries. She sat with me through the bad evenings. She was the one who noticed, long before I did, that something was not right. But that Christmas, Derek came home with his wife, and he came bearing gifts. The one for me was wrapped in silver paper with a green bow. He set it on the kitchen table with both hands, carefully, like it was fragile. I found it at an antique market in Soho, he said. Thought it would be perfect for you. For Mom's photos. There was a digital photo frame. Dark walnut casing, about 8 inches wide, with a small brass plate on the back that said it was manufactured sometime in the 1970s, though the digital display inside was obviously modern. The kind of thing someone had retrofitted. It was beautiful, honestly. Warm wood grain, heavy in the hands. I turned it over a few times. You can load it with pictures from your phone, Derek said. Rachel can help you set it up. I thought you'd like having Mom on the nightstand instead of just that empty spot. I looked at him over the frame. He was smiling. He had Carol's eyes, both of them did, and sometimes that still caught me off guard. I told him it was thoughtful. I told him it was the nicest gift I'd received in a long time, and I meant it. I put it on my nightstand that night, and Rachel helped me load it with 63 photos of Carol, and for a few weeks I felt something close to grateful. The nausea started in February. Not dramatic nausea. Not the kind that puts you on the bathroom floor, just a persistent, low-grade wrongness every morning when I woke up. Like the first hour of a stomach bug that never fully arrived and never fully left. I mentioned it to my doctor at my February checkup. He ran some blood work, said my levels looked fine, attributed it to grief-related stress and disrupted sleep. He wasn't wrong that I wasn't sleeping well. I accepted the explanation because it was easier than pushing back. By March, I noticed I was losing hair. Not dramatically, just more than usual on the pillow, more in the shower drain. I had a full head of silver hair, and I was proud of it, if I'm honest. Carol used to say it made me look distinguished. I told myself it was age. I told myself it was age. I told myself 67-year-old men lose hair. I started taking a biotin supplement I found at the Walgreens on Merriman Avenue. By April, my fingernails had changed. Small white lines running horizontally across them. I'd never seen that before. I Googled it at midnight on a Tuesday and found references to something called Mees lines, which can appear with certain vitamin deficiencies. I added a multivitamin to the biotin and made a note to mention it at my next appointment. What I didn't do was connect any of this to the frame. It sat on my nightstand cycling through photos of Carol, her at the Grand Canyon in 1987, her laughing at our youngest nephew's wedding, her holding Rachel the day Rachel was born, exhausted and radiant. I looked at it every night before I turned off the light, and every morning when I woke up. It was the last thing I saw before sleep and the first thing I saw each day. Derek called every few weeks. He asked how I was feeling. I told him about the nausea and the tiredness, and he made sympathetic sounds and suggested I was probably not eating well enough, that single men of a certain age didn't take care of themselves properly. He was probably right, I said. I'd try to do better. Rachel noticed things more carefully. She noticed that I was moving more slowly when she came over for dinner in April. She noticed that my hands had a faint tremor when I poured the iced tea. She didn't say anything that night, but she called me the next day and said she thought I should see a specialist, not just my general practitioner. I told her she was overreacting. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dad, I'm not." I made an appointment with an internist named Dr. Okafor at the Mission Hospital outpatient clinic. She was thorough in a way my regular doctor hadn't been. She asked questions about my environment, what I ate, what I drank, where I spent most of my time, what had changed in the past year. She ordered a broader panel of blood work than I'd had before, including a heavy metal screen. She called me 4 days later. "I need you to come in," she said, "today if possible." My arsenic levels were elevated, not catastrophically but significantly above normal range. She asked me whether I'd been exposed to old pipes, old paint, certain pesticides, certain wood preservatives. I was a history teacher. I knew about industrial arsenic. I knew about Victorian wallpaper and old pressure-treated lumber. I walked through every explanation with her. None of them fit. My house was built in 1998. I didn't do a lot of yard work anymore. I hadn't changed anything about my diet. Dr. Okafor was measured and professional, but I could see she was troubled. "We'll repeat the test in 3 weeks," she said, "and I want you to think very carefully about anything new that came into your environment in the last 6 to 8 months. Anything at all." I drove home and sat in the driveway for 15 minutes. 6 to 8 months. Derek had given me the frame in December. I went inside and stood in the bedroom doorway looking at it. Carol smiled at me from behind the glass. I thought about what Dr. Okafor had said. I thought about the nausea and the hair and the white lines on my nails. I picked up the frame and turned it over. Turned it back, set it face down on the bed. I didn't throw it away. Not yet. Because the thought forming in my mind was one I did not want to finish forming. This was my son. My son, who had Carol's eyes and who had cried at her graveside, with his head bent and his shoulders shaking. I had watched him grieve. I had believed in that grief completely. I called Rachel that evening. I told her about Dr. Okafor. I told her about the arsenic. I told her about the frame. The silence on the other end of the line was very long. "Don't touch it," she said finally, "and don't say anything to Derek yet. Let me look into some things." I didn't ask what things. I trusted Rachel the way you trust the person who showed up when everyone else sent cards. What I didn't know was that Rachel had already been suspicious of Derek for months. Not of this, not of anything this deliberate and dark, but she had noticed things at Christmas that I hadn't. She'd noticed how many times he walked into the bedroom, how he'd insisted on being the one to set the frame on the nightstand, adjusting it twice before he was satisfied with its position. She'd thought it was oddly attentive for someone who rarely paid attention to anything that didn't benefit him directly. She also knew things about Derek's finances that I didn't. He'd called her in October, 6 weeks before Christmas, and asked her whether she thought Dad would consider an early withdrawal from the estate. He'd phrased it carefully, said he was going through a difficult quarter, said it was temporary. Rachel had told him the estate wasn't hers to discuss, that he should talk to me directly. He never did. She'd thought about mentioning it to me and decided not to, not wanting to create conflict over the holidays. She was regretting that decision now. Rachel's husband Thomas is an engineer, and Thomas knew a man named Gerald who had spent 4 decades working as an industrial electrician before he retired. Gerald had opinions about old electronics the way some men have opinions about old cars. Rachel called him on a Saturday morning and asked if he'd be willing to take a look at something. Gerald came by the following Tuesday. He was a compact man in his mid-70s, wore a canvas work shirt, and carried a small kit of tools and testing equipment that he set on my kitchen table with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 50 years. I brought the frame out and set it down. He picked it up immediately, turned it over, examined the back panel, and then held it under the kitchen light. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. I told him my son had given it to me. He set it back down on the table and looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Do you know what this casing is made of?" he said. I told him I'd assumed it was walnut. It looked like walnut. He shook his head slowly. It's not. This is bakelite over a metal composite. And this composite, he tapped the back panel with one finger. This isn't standard manufacture. Someone added material to this casing. Do you see this seam here? This isn't original to the frame. He showed me a fine line running along the interior edge of the back panel, barely visible unless you were looking for it. I'm not a toxicologist, Gerald said. I'm not going to tell you I know exactly what's in here, but I can tell you this has been modified. The casing has been opened and resealed, and if you've been sleeping next to this thing for 8 months, I'd want to know what it's been emitting. He set the frame face down on the table and looked at me steadily. I wouldn't touch it again until someone who knows what they're doing has a look at it. Rachel drove me to Dr. Okafor's office that afternoon, with the frame sealed in a Ziploc bag inside a plastic tote. Dr. Okafor referred us to an environmental health specialist at the university, a woman named Dr. Benson, who had the frame analyzed by the end of that week. The modified casing contained a compound arsenate material, a slow-release chemical composite embedded in a treated resin that had been fitted into the inner wall of the frame. At close range, over months of prolonged daily exposure, it produced the kind of low-level arsenic contamination Dr. Okafor had found in my blood work. Not enough to kill quickly, enough to make a 67-year-old man progressively sicker in ways that looked like age, like grief, like neglect. Dr. Benson said it was deliberate. There was no accidental explanation. I sat in her office and I listened to her say those words, and I thought about Derek at Christmas setting, that frame on my nightstand with both hands, adjusting it twice. I want to be honest with you about what happened inside me in that moment, because I think it matters. There was grief first. Not anger. Grief. The same flat, airless feeling I'd had standing at Carol's grave. A kind of disbelief that the world could actually be this specific shape. And then, underneath that, something harder, something that had to do with my own survival. I called Rachel from the parking lot. I know, she said before I could say anything. She'd already contacted an attorney friend of hers named Martin, who had walked her through the steps. She had already gathered Derek's text messages from the past year, the ones where he'd asked about the estate, the ones where his financial desperation had shown through the careful wording. She had spoken to Thomas, who had spoken to Gerald, who had agreed to provide a written account of what he'd found. Don't call him, Rachel said. Don't warn him. Let me handle this the right way. I want to tell you I was disciplined. I want to tell you I followed her instructions perfectly. But I'm 67 years old and Derek is my son, and I sat across from him at Carol's funeral, and I believed he was grieving. I had spent 40 years raising him. I had coached him in Little League. I had driven him to Charlotte when he got his first real job and helped him move boxes into his first apartment. I had believed, with every part of myself, that whatever else he was mine. I called him on a Thursday evening. I didn't tell him what I knew. I just needed to hear his voice. I think I was still hoping, in some irrational way, that there would be an explanation I hadn't thought of. That I would hear something in his voice that would make this make sense in a way I could live with. He answered on the second ring. Asked how I was feeling. I said I'd been better. There was a pause. Your energy still low? He said. Yes, I said, still low. Another pause. And then he said, you should rest more, Dad. At your age, the body just doesn't recover the way it used to. I said goodnight. I sat in the kitchen with the phone face down on the table and the lights off for a long time. Rachel had been recording. She had anticipated I might call him regardless of what she'd said, and she'd asked me to use the phone app that logged calls, which I'd installed months ago for a different reason, and forgotten about. The recording wasn't dramatic. There was nothing on it that was an explicit confession, but Martin said it was useful context. It showed Derek's pattern of monitoring my symptoms without ever once suggesting I see a better doctor. The Buncombe County Sheriff's Department sent 2 investigators to Derek's house in Charlotte on a Friday morning. Rachel and I had met with them the previous day. We gave them the frame, the lab results, Dr. Okafor's documentation, Gerald's written account, and the phone records. Martin was present for the entire meeting. Derek was arrested before noon. Rachel called me when it was done. She was crying, which she almost never does, and I was sitting on the back porch, looking at the yard where Carol used to grow tomatoes. "It's okay to feel whatever you're feeling," Rachel said. I told her I wasn't sure what I was feeling. "Me neither," she said. The investigation went on for several months. The Charlotte police added a financial fraud component when they found that Derek had taken out a significant loan against future inheritance he did not legally have access to, and that his business had been in serious trouble for over a year. His attorney argued that the frame modification was done by someone else, that Derek had purchased it secondhand and had no knowledge of its contents. The lab analysis of the chemical compound, combined with the sourcing investigation, connected the materials to a specific supplier Derek had contacted through his construction industry contacts. The jury took less than 2 days. He was sentenced to 14 years for aggravated assault causing bodily harm with premeditation, with additional fraud charges. His attorney is appealing. I don't follow the process closely. I have a folder that Martin maintains. I look at it when I need to. Mostly I try not to. My arsenic levels are back to normal. Dr. Okafor monitors me every 3 months. I sleep better than I did, though not perfectly. Gerald comes over sometimes on Saturday afternoons. We drink coffee and he tells me about electrical systems, and I tell him about the Civil War, and we are, I think, good for each other. Rachel calls every Sunday. She doesn't ask me how I feel about Derek anymore, because she understands that I don't have an answer that fits into a phone call. What I feel is not simple. I love him the way you love someone you made from scratch, the way you love someone who carried your wife's eyes, and I cannot forgive what he did in any way that means the forgiveness dissolves the fact of it. Those two things live in me at the same time, and I have stopped trying to resolve them. Carol's photos are still on my phone. Rachel found a simple white frame at Target, plastic and light and completely ordinary, and loaded the same 63 pictures into it. It sits on the nightstand now. Carol at the Grand Canyon. Carol at the wedding. Carol holding Rachel on the day she was born. I look at it every night before I turn off the light. I've started sleeping with the window open, even in winter. I like the cold air coming in. I like the sound of the neighborhood at night, the dogs in the cars, and the wind moving through the big maple in the front yard. My house was built in 1998, and it's solid, and it's mine, and I'm still in it. Which, some mornings, feels like the whole point. If you're watching from somewhere tonight and you have a child you love without condition, hold that. I mean it. Hold that while you can. And if someone gives you a gift and insists on placing it exactly where they want it, exactly that close to where you sleep, pay attention to that. The body keeps score before the mind is willing to. I almost didn't. There's a photo of Carol on my nightstand right now. She's standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, squinting into the afternoon sun, and she's laughing at something I said that I can't remember anymore. I look at that photo every night, and I think about how close I came to not being here to look at it. What Derek did had a logic to it, even if that logic was monstrous. He needed money. He needed time. He needed me gone before I could change anything. And he believed, this is the part that still stays with me. He believed that his need was large enough to justify the method. That's not a stranger's thinking. That's something that grows slowly in a person. A kind of moral rot that starts small and spreads when nobody names it and nobody pushes back. I don't know exactly when Derek stopped caring whether I lived or died. I don't know if there was a specific moment, but I know that nobody is born that way. Somewhere along the line, the habit of justifying small dishonesties becomes the habit of justifying larger ones, and eventually you are standing in your father's bedroom adjusting a poisoned frame on his nightstand and telling yourself you had no choice. I had choices too. I chose to ignore the nausea for months. I chose to accept the easy explanations because the harder one was unbearable. That's not weakness exactly. It's something more human than that, the way love makes you resistant to evidence. But I've had to reckon with the fact that my own unwillingness to see clearly almost finished what Derek started. Rachel saw it before I did. Gerald saw it before I did. I was the last one in the room to understand what was happening in my own house, and that humility has stayed with me. What saved me wasn't luck. The luck was part of it. What saved me was Rachel's steadiness, the kind of clear-eyed, patient attention that doesn't flinch and doesn't catastrophize, that just keeps gathering information and making the next right move. That's a kind of intelligence that doesn't get talked about enough. Not brilliance, not speed, just the willingness to keep looking when looking is hard. And Gerald, a retired electrician with a canvas work shirt and a kit of old tools, who showed up on a Tuesday afternoon and picked up a frame and knew immediately that something was wrong. He had no reason to get involved beyond basic human decency. He got involved anyway. That still means something to me. It means that most people, given the chance, will do the right thing. Not all people, but most. I'm 67 years old. I walk 2 miles every morning along the road behind my house. My arsenic levels are normal. I have coffee with Gerald on Saturdays. Rachel calls every Sunday. The maple in my front yard is 40 years old and still standing. I don't know what Derek thinks about at night. I hope, somewhere underneath everything, he knows what he did. Not because I want him to suffer. I don't. Not anymore. But because a person can't really rebuild themselves without first admitting what they destroyed. That's the only honest path forward I know of. You face what you did. You take responsibility for it without excuse. And then, if you have anything left in you, you start again. I'm still starting again too, in my own way. That's what I know about being alive at 67.